Can bras trigger breast cancer? What if everything you thought you knew about bras and breast cancer turned out to be wrong? We just talked about that. This is a big section, so we'll run through that one quickly. More correlation accumulation. Medical anthropologist Singer saw that when his wife removed her bra, both of her breasts were outlined by dark red lines. Now, I bring this slide up because I want you women tonight to look and see. Because, yeah, you get what I'm saying. There's not one of you here that doesn't know what I'm telling you is real. You get it. But to make it even more real than what I'm saying to you, to get it out of the cerebral and put it into the heart, I want you to look at your bodies. You're going to be stunned. More than 60% of the women we asked to do that said they had indentations on their bodies, and not all of them were big bosom, but the majority were. The larger amount of indentation and cutoff to the lymphatic glands you have, because you have bigger breasts, and again, you have an unnatural state of affairs when you're trying to prop them up and make them do something that they don't normally and naturally do. Your breasts aren't supposed to be up here all of the time. They're supposed to be hanging down. And by the way, the lymphatic system needs to operate, the major filter system of the body, by them swinging back and forth and moving, and by the testes doing the same exact thing. And if you don't do that, why wouldn't it make sense to you that the filters get clogged, and when they get clogged, the next inevitable step is you're going to end up with a problem. And the biggest problem starts with a C. The observation came in the wake of his wife's discovery in 1991 that she had a suspicious lump on her breast. So guess what? That's how that all happens. Let's look at this. More correlation. Striking differences emerged in the answers from two groups. 1% of the cancer group wore the bras for less than 12 hours a day. 20% of the non-cancer group wore bras less than 12 hours a day. Even thinking about being a male, I've never obviously wore a bra, not even at a Halloween party. But the reality is, I couldn't imagine sticking something on my upper body that constrained me 12 hours a day. To me, this is total insanity. 18% of the cancer group wore bras to bed. 3% of the non-cancer group wore bras to bed. Now think about that. More correlation accumulated. 1% of the group wore their bras for less than 12 hours. 20%, no, let's keep going. 14% non-cancer group had breastfed their children. Another big correlation. Women who, by the way, breastfeed their children have substantially and significantly less breast cancer than women who do not. Now, how many of you realize that most of the women that stay overweight after they've had a child is because they have not breastfed? How many of you know that? When you suckle, when the baby suckles the breast, it activates hormones that break down the fat that the body accumulates to hold up the belly when you have a baby. If, by the way, you do not, for the 1.5 to 2 years, prerequisite time to make the baby healthy, immunologically, psychologically, etc., breastfeed, having that suckling, you're going to have a whole time big problem your whole life keeping that fat and weight off you. Isn't that amazing how nature takes care of everything? Again, when we use our improper, incorrect perception, we sabotage even something like that. I mean, I see these little skinny women, they have their first baby, and well over half of them now in our culture never get little skinny again. They all have butts, and they're walking around, and some of these poor women, who obviously are eating horribly bad diets and not exercising at all, you start to see the abnormality that creates a much higher incidence of cancer, heart disease, diabetes, etc., just because they choose not to do what's natural by breastfeeding a child. Okay, let's keep going on this. But this goes on and on and on. This is one of several studies that literally show you the correlation between bras, breast cancer, etc., etc. There's medical. When you read this book, you're going to be stunned that this is the first time you heard about it. What are the breast toxins? Breast cancer specialists in general agreement about 85% of the 200,000 women in the U.S. who are diagnosed with breast cancer each year have an inherent genetic predisposition that might have predicted based on their family history, which means that unhealthy lifestyle choices and the absorption of environmental pollutants account for the vast majority of the cases. Now, where you see medical doctors who have been unfortunately misled by the allopathic leaders, the pharmaceutical heads and the medical schools, to tell people that genetics play the major role in cancers, they are utterly wrong. And Dr. Yu, a colleague and very close friend, an oncological surgeon, very advanced, very smart guy, knows as much about both fields, as good in allopathic as he is in natural medicine. And there's nothing that you can't talk to him about that he speaks about very well, articulately, intelligently, because he's done his work. And he said to me, this is really what frustrates both of us, Dr. Yu and I, that last year in the United States we had 8,500 women submit themselves to having their breast removed without cancer. And the BRCA gene is what they come up with. And he said, have you had as much as I've had? I said, yeah. He said, let's talk to the top geneticist. I said, you know him? He said, yeah. Let's call the guy that has created the genetic code. And just ask him the question that frustrates you. He said, he doesn't have much time. You have 2 minutes on the phone with him. I said to him, listen, do you think genetics has anything at all to do with cancer or other diseases? He said 5%. He said only 5% of disease comes from genetic heritage. 95% comes from lifestyle choices, environments, etc. So when you hear a doctor say to you, does your mother have it, does your grandmother have it, the reason you may have it is because you lived exactly the same way your mother and grandmother did. Not because it's genetics that cause that. And Hippocrates is the best example in the planet's history of why genetics are not real. If everything was genetics and you were predisposed to this, why do people come with stage 4 diseases and reverse them? If it was genetic, I couldn't do that. If I had cancer, I couldn't take it and change my genes. So see how you're being misled. And the poor doctors are being misled. So I have intelligent conversations with some of these MDs, and they really believe that. And I say, well, why don't you read the geneticist? They're the ones who understand genetics. You don't. You never studied genetics at school. Even if you study it well, you're not a geneticist. So these are the kind of crazy things that you, the public, has to deal with today. Misinformation. Bad information all the time. Let's keep going on this. We'll open for questions very soon on this. This part of the book I wrote, mostly. Anna Maria didn't. Did you get that joke? Lymph system evidence for theory. There are 3 primary steps or stages in the theory. Toxins that can cause cancer, such as the ones in consumed products, are absorbed by the body. They then accumulate in fat tissue because fat tissue attracts toxins like a magnet. A woman's breast tissue is mostly composed of fat cells, so toxins tend to be stored there. So the more weight you have on your body, now some people are literally skinny and have a lot of fat in their body. Where you have a lot of big people that have very little body fat, but they look big. So it's not all I'm skinny and don't have body fat. Anyone that has exceptional fat that's not built into muscle, weight that's not muscle, that's the real weight that you want, literally have a greater and higher propensity to get every disease known to man. Because where chemicals and heavy metals hang out is in fat in the body. So by giving up animal foods, not only do you save your health, your life, the planet, but you're also saving the possibility that you will not get a disease. So this, why, if I know this, and you know what I'm telling you is real, isn't this pervasive in the field of healthcare today? There's not a doctor or a scientist or a researcher that I would ever suggest to them that fat is where heavy metals and chemicals are residing that wouldn't agree with that. Then again, just like when the EPA said that fluoride causes cancer, the next day they should have said, let's eliminate it. Well, if they know, by the way, that fats and animal fats are where you get that from, hold the disease-causing elements, why wouldn't the next day the step be that let's get rid of the fat? Let's get rid of the disease-causing elements in the body. Body's lymph system plays a role, along with the liver, in removing toxins. If the lymph system fails to play its designed role effectively, toxins get stored in fat cells for too long, triggering the development of cancer cells. Now, the best way for me to describe this to you so you get a very vivid picture is that if you look at you, if I took your head and put a plastic bag over it, what would you look like in about 5 minutes? Just picture what that may look like. Your eyes would be bulging. You wouldn't be breathing anymore. You'd be gray. You'd be laying on the ground. What happens if I put animal fat around the head of your cell? You think it may be gray? You think it may be laying on the ground and not mobile? You think the electromagnetic frequency would be drained out of it? And do you think when you beat up a cell that much and it's almost dead, it wouldn't be easy to seduce into becoming what? A cancer cell. You beat anyone up enough, they're going to go along with anything. You see these poor kids that were accused, the 5 young kids that were accused back in the 80s of raping that girl in Central Park? And I just saw an interview recently with them, a brilliant interview. And they said, why didn't you just agree? They said, we couldn't take anymore. The police were just beating on us so much that we just said it would be better to leave this room and admit we did something we didn't do than to sit here under the gruesome conditions we have today. So that's literally the same thing that you would do if I beat you up enough, you'd succumb, even if it wasn't true, is how you get diseases like cancer. The cell just can't tolerate anymore. Enough already. How much badness do you have to give the cell before you expect it to fight back with you? Because your body's lymph system is reliant on passive forms of fluid propulsion like movement and exercise, unlike your heart, which drives blood through your vessels, the lymph system is sensitive to outside physical pressure. Since there are lymph pathways and lymph nodes in your armpits, under your breast and between your breast, a tight-fitting bra can squeeze those areas and prevent proper drainage of lymph fluid that might ordinarily carry away toxins stored in fat. Now, again, I just told you 18 minutes ago that less than 5% of you exercise adequately. What does that mean? This is the first of many times you may hear me say it. We know because of people who have spent their entire life in the science of exercise. The most notable worldwide is down in Texas, called Dr. Kenneth Cooper. Dr. Kenneth Cooper has established without any question, without any challenge, that just to maintain health, not to be healthy, to maintain health, you have to be doing at least 35 minutes of aerobic exercise 5 days a week. This is not an option, by the way. You will get more than 3 times the benefit if you're willing to do an extra 35 minutes and go to an hour. We also know that it takes 28 minutes of vigorous aerobic exercise to get to the point where you're getting full body benefit. 28 minutes to get full circulation where from your feet to your head, blood is moving through, oxygen is coming up. And so if you go from 28 to 35, great, 7 minutes, but how about 28 to 60 minutes? Now you have that blood flow going. And remember what I said about depression and exercise, moderate to light depression. It will remove, I promise you, I'll bet money with you, on 50% of the people if we can consistently get you to do aerobic exercise. Okay. Weightlifting, you must do at least an hour and a half, 3 days a week. That's sissy stuff. You should be doing 2.5 to 3.5 hours. But if you're not doing at least an hour and a half, you will not be healthy. And by the way, 82% of muscle comes from fat. So we want to get rid of the fat that holds the chemicals and the heavy metals that cause disease. The number one best way to do it is not change your diet, it's to lift weights. You will not look healthy and sexy without weightlifting. Every model, every actor, every actress that you admire their bodies, they weightlift. Period. You do not look like that unless you lift weight. Everybody in the world lifted weight until about 5 generations ago. Again, it was called farming. Nobody had an option. We're not going to go out to the local, lifestyle gym or LA Fitness or Bally's Fitness. We're going to go out and plow the field. We're going to carry the children. We're going to pick the crop. Everyone weightlifted. You go to the only places in the world where people are thin now are in places where people are eating plant-based diets and doing vigorous exercise. When I was in Cairo, Egypt, working years ago, I was stunned because at 4 and 5 in the morning, I'd hear a commotion down on the street below my hotel room, and I'd see these skinny little men lifting up bales. So after several weeks of this, I happened to be walking back with all big Western guys, well, big my size and a little bit bigger, and we took one of these bales, and 4 of us tried to lift it, and it was almost impossible for 4 of us to try to lift it. And I looked over, and here's a little skinny man that must have been 75 years old, lifting these on his back from 4 or 5 in the morning till 6 and 7 at night when we were coming back to the hotel. And this is what he did 6 days a week. And I thought to myself, I think I'm strong. I think I'm healthy. few years ago, I happened to be up speaking, and I asked somebody if they would let me use their old horse plow. And as they walked me over, they kept saying, well, you know, I'm not sure you should do this. Very polite man, much older than me. And I said, well, you know, I work out at the gym, and I do all of this stuff. He said, well, I'm not sure you should do this. So they finally got all the leather straps around me and stuck the things on my shoulder. And before you know it, I'm being dragged by these horses on my knees practically down. I said, ho, 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 stop, stop. And I'm thinking to myself, do you realize that I go way out of my way to be strong and healthy? And I'm a wimp compared to what the average person would have been 100 years ago? And I went over to the guy that lent me the plow, and I said, how long have you... He said, oh, I was out here at 7 today. He said, I did stop for an hour and a half to eat lunch with my family. He said, I'll be here until sundown tonight. 12 hours that day, he was taking the plow and going up and down in lines. And in a minute and a half, I screamed and said, stop doing it. Now think about this. Think about this. Now how about those of you that don't exercise at all? You would have put the wood over your shoulders and collapsed into the mud. You wouldn't even have got a minute and a half. Think about that. Craziness. The lymph system is so important. We can go through this in great detail. Very, very important, because the lymph system's throughout the body, and most of your disorders come from a clogged lymph system, not only breast cancer, a wide variety. What purpose do bras have? Let's keep going. You know what, they're for men, not for women. But women have been conned into thinking about them. How many of you realize that nobody wore bras 100 years ago and before? That's a fairly new invention. Sort of like around the same time, a little bit before, I was there. Now, we'd never been known as a high-energy kind of guy. 58-year-old cleaner Frank Lewin certainly made the sparks fly one day in September 2005 when his job hunting in Warrpool Town in Western Australia, wearing several items of synthetic clothing, including a zip-up line jacket, he walked into a lobby of a local business and loud explosion sound erupted like a large firecracker when he walked onto the carpet. Burn marks began to appear on the carpet where his footsteps had signed in. Now, can you think of this? Here a guy goes to his local store, buys garments. It's the middle of very hot summer. They get 40 degrees, Celsius there. And his body explodes because he gets synthetic carpet that has electromagnetic static in it, connecting with the electromagnetic static, and it explodes just like the guys in Iraq did. Now, before I started to talk about any of this, let's be very candid. How many of you ever once pondered and considered clothing being one of the contributors to major disease? Raise your hand. So 2 or 3 people, 4 people here. And so that means in a room like this with 150, 200 people, that the vast, overwhelming majority of you never once considered this. Isn't that something when you think about it? It really is something. And not to say that we're stupid, we're just misled. I didn't think about this until I started this work. Never once did I ponder this or think about it. And I started to look at these people and say, my God, here like this yoga girl we talked about. She'd been a vegan. She was healthy. She did more exercise than I told you to do. The high end of the exercise. And here she ended up with cancer.